The heavy glass door of Maison de la Toile swung open with a whisper. Not a clang, designed to welcome the right kind of people and silently discourage everyone else. Inside, the world changed. The noise of the bustling city street faded into a hushed silence, replaced by the soft, instrumental notes of a classical piano piece that no one could quite name. The air was cool and carried a faint, expensive scent-mix of polished mahogany, a hint of floral perfume from the staff, and the clean, metallic smell of money. Light from recessed spotlights in the ceiling shone down on glass displays, making the jewels within them sparkle as if they had their own internal source of power. This was not just a store. It was a sanctuary for wealth, a place where the price tags were spoken of in whispers, and the sales were as much about status as they were about the products themselves. The staff moved through this space like sharks in a perfectly maintained aquarium. They were sleek, well-dressed, and their eyes were constantly scanning, assessing, and calculating. They knew the difference between a person who was merely curious and a person who was ready to buy. It was a skill they prided themselves on, an unspoken science of observation. They could spot the brand of a watch from 20 feet, recognize the cut of a suit, gauge the weight of a handbag with a single glance. Their livelihoods depended on this ability to separate the lookers from the buyers, and they had become masters of their craft. Their smiles were tailored, their posture perfect. Their deference was a commodity they sold to the highest bidder. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, the store was moderately busy. A portly man with a ruddy face and a booming laugh was trying on a series of thick gold chains, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet space. His wife, draped in what looked like a mink coat despite the mild weather, sipped champagne from a flute and nodded her approval at each new piece he adorned. They were exactly the kind of customers the staff loved to see. They were loud, they were obvious, and they were there to spend. At the center of it all was the head sales associate, a man named Julian. He was in his late 30s, with perfectly styled dark hair that never seemed to be out of place, and a tailored suit that probably cost more than a monthly salary for most people. He moved with an air of practiced confidence, his smile for the boisterous customer both warm and genuine, or at least a very convincing imitation of it. He was the king of this domain, the gatekeeper of the glittering treasures, and he took his role very seriously. For Julian, every customer was a puzzle, and his job was to quickly solve them. He had seen it, all the shy millionaires, the newly rich trying too hard, the old money who barely glance at the prices. He had a script for each of them, a way to make them feel special, understood, and eager to buy. It was at 2:17 p.m. that the young woman walked in. The soft chime of the door was barely audible over the man's laughter, and at first, no one really noticed her. She was a quiet presence stepping into a world of noise. Her name was Anya, and she was 22 years old. She had a face that was open and friendly, with wide, thoughtful eyes, and a mouth that seemed to be on the verge of a smile. There was a natural charm about her, a warmth that could have put people at ease in any other setting. But here, in the cold, gleaming world of Maison de la Toile, her simple presence was like a drop of rain in a desert of diamonds. She wore a plain white t-shirt that was soft and well-worn, tucked into a pair of faded blue jeans that fit her comfortably. Over the shirt, she had a simple denim jacket, its sleeves slightly rolled up to reveal her wrists. On her feet were a pair of scuffed brown leather boots, the kind made for walking long distances, not for making a fashion statement. Her only piece of jewelry was a thin silver chain around her neck with a small, unadorned silver charm that rested just above the collar of her t-shirt. It looked handmade, personal. Slung over one shoulder was a large canvas tote bag, the kind you might get at a museum or a bookstore. Its once vibrant design now faded from years of use. Julian's eyes flickered towards her for a brief moment. A quick, automatic scan. It took him less than 2 seconds to make his assessment. No designer label on the clothes. No expensive watch on her wrist. No heavy perfume. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, without a single intricate style in sight. In his mental calculation, she was a zero. A student, perhaps, or a tourist who had wandered in to escape the heat. Someone who would look, maybe take a few pictures with her phone, and then leave. Wasting a few precious minutes of his time, he gave her a polite but dismissive nod, the kind reserved for people who were not considered potential clients, and then immediately turned his full attention back to the man with the gold chains, whose laugh had just grown even louder. "A magnificent choice, sir," Julian said, his voice smooth as silk. "It truly speaks to your success." Anya didn't seem to notice the slight, or if she did, it didn't show on her face. She closed the door gently behind her and took a moment to let her eyes adjust to the light. She didn't look overwhelmed or intimidated by the opulence. Instead, she looked focused. Her gaze swept across the room, not with the wide-eyed wonder of a dreamer, but with the quiet intensity of someone searching for something specific. She ignored the grand displays near the entrance, the ones filled with the biggest, flashiest pieces designed to catch the eye of anyone walking in. She started a slow, methodical walk along the left wall of the store, her footsteps silent on the thick, cream-colored carpet. She passed a case filled with rings, each one more dazzling than the last. Diamonds the size of a person's knuckle glimmered under the spotlights, surrounded by bands of platinum and white gold. She glanced at them, but her eyes didn't linger. She moved on to the next case, which held a collection of elaborate brooches and pendants, shaped like exotic birds and blooming flowers. A younger saleswoman, a girl named Celine, with a tight, professional smile, was polishing the glass of this case. She looked up as Anya approached, her eyes performing the same quick, dismissive calculation that Julian's had. "Let me know if you need anything," Celine said, her voice bright but empty. It was a standard phrase, a way of acknowledging a presence without offering any real service. Anya simply nodded and continued walking, her eyes still scanning. She moved deeper into the store, away from the main crowd. The light here was a little softer, the displays a little more discreet. This was where the truly serious pieces were kept, the heirlooms and the investment-grade jewels. Anya's pace slowed even more. She was no longer just walking. She was examining. She would stop at a case, lean in slightly, her hands clasped behind her back, and study the contents with a concentration that was almost palpable. She wasn't looking at the price tags. She wasn't distracted by the sparkle. She was looking at the craftsmanship, the settings, the way the metal held the stones. It was as if she was reading a story in each piece. 10 minutes passed. Julian had successfully sold the man 2 of the gold chains, a transaction that involved much backslapping and promises of future visits. The couple, satisfied with their purchases and the attention they had received, finally left, the heavy door closing behind them with a soft thud. Julian straightened his tie, a small, satisfied smile on his face. That was a good commission. He scanned the room again, looking for his next target. Celine was now assisting a well-dressed older man who was interested in a watch. The other 2 associates were busy with a pair of women who were speaking rapid-fire French and pointing at a collection of earrings. And then he saw her, the girl in the jeans. She was still there, standing in front of a quiet display case in the far corner of the store. She had been there for at least 10 minutes, just standing and looking. A flicker of annoyance went through him. She was taking up space, loitering. He had been so sure she would have left by now. He watched her for a moment. She wasn't touching the glass. She wasn't trying to get anyone's attention. She was just standing there. Her stillness was unnerving. In a store designed for movement and desire, her quiet patience was an anomaly. He let out a soft, almost inaudible sigh. It was his duty as the head associate to deal with all customers, even the ones who were just wasting his time. He had to ask her to leave, but he had to do it politely, of course. He plastered on his most professional, most neutral smile and began to walk towards her, his shoes making no sound on the plush carpet. He was ready to deliver the polite, firm line he reserved for such occasions. A line that encouraged browsers to make way for real buyers. He had no idea that in a few moments, his entire world and his assessment of this quiet young woman was about to be turned completely upside down. Julian's walk across the thick, cream-colored carpet was a masterclass in controlled movement. Each step was measured, silent, and purposeful. He was the head associate, the captain of this ship, and he was about to remove a piece of driftwood from his pristine waters. His smile was fixed in place, a well-practiced curve of his lips that didn't reach his eyes. His mind, however, was not smiling. It was running through a series of quick, sharp calculations. 10 minutes. She had been standing there for 10 full minutes, just staring into one case. In that time, he had made a sale worth a small car, and this girl had contributed nothing but a quiet, unassuming presence. It was an irritation, a small but persistent pebble in his shoe. He had rehearsed the lines in his head 100 times. A polite, "Is there something specific I can help you find?" followed by a gentle, "We find that our clients often have a clearer idea of what they're looking for before they come in. Perhaps you'd like to browse our website first to get a sense of our collection." It was a polite, firm, and effective way of saying, "You don't belong here. Please leave." He finally reached her, stopping a respectful distance away, not wanting to seem intimidating, but close enough to make his presence felt. She didn't turn immediately. Her focus was entirely on the display case in front of her, her body angled towards it as if it were the only thing in the room. Julian took a moment to look at what had captured her attention for so long. It was a necklace, but not just any necklace. It was the centerpiece of this section, a piece they called the Celestial Cascade. It was a breathtaking waterfall of canary yellow and white diamonds, set in a web of platinum so fine it looked like spun silver thread. The stones cascaded down in a delicate asymmetrical pattern, culminating in a single, pear-shaped canary diamond that hung like a captured tear of the sun. It was legendary in the industry, one-of-a-kind creation that had been in the store for over 5 years, waiting for a buyer whose wealth was as vast and rare as the necklace itself. The price was a number with so many zeros it seemed abstract, a fantasy. And this girl in the faded jeans and canvas tote, was staring at it as if she were admiring a painting in a museum. "Can I help you with something?" Julian asked, his voice smooth and professional, but with an undercurrent of impatience that he hoped she wouldn't detect. He expected her to jump, to be startled out of her daydream. He expected her to stammer an apology and say something like, "Oh, I was just looking," but she didn't. Anya turned her head slowly, her movements calm and unhurried. Her eyes, which had seemed so gentle and open from a distance, were now sharp and clear. They met his without a flicker of intimidation or deference. She looked at him not as a figure of authority, but as a person who had just asked her a question. A small, polite smile touched her lips. "Yes, you can," she said. Her voice was soft, but it carried a surprising weight, a quiet confidence that was completely at odds with her appearance. She turned her gaze back to the necklace and raised a single, slender finger, pointing directly at the Celestial Cascade. "I would like to see that one, please." For a split second, Julian's brain stopped working. The words didn't compute. It was like a child pointing at a fighter jet and asking to take it for a spin. He blinked, his practiced smile faltering for just a moment. He looked from her face to her pointing finger to the necklace and back to her face. His eyes did a quick, frantic scan of her again. The worn denim jacket, the simple t-shirt, the scuffed boots, the canvas tote bag. It was impossible. It had to be a joke. Maybe she was a prankster, a YouTuber looking for content. Maybe she was just a very dedicated dreamer. But the way she had said it, so calmly, so matter-of-factly, threw him off balance. There was no hint of a joke in her eyes. It's no sign that she was anything but completely serious. He cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. "Of course," he said, his voice a little tighter than before, "the Celestial Cascade is one of our most exclusive pieces. It is, of course, available for viewing by appointment only for our qualified clients." He used the words exclusive, appointment, and qualified like a set of keys. Locking a door he was sure she couldn't open. He was giving her an out, a way to back down gracefully, without admitting she couldn't afford it. He expected her to nod, maybe look a little disappointed, and then walk away. Anya didn't take the out. She simply lowered her hand and looked at him, her expression unchanged. "I understand," she said. "I don't have an appointment. But I'm here now, and I am a qualified client." She said the words, "qualified client," without a trace of irony. as if she were simply stating a fact, like saying the sky was blue. Julian felt a bead of sweat form on his temple. This was not going according to his script. He was the gatekeeper, and this girl was not just walking through the gate. She was acting as if she owned the whole property. He was out of his depth. He needed backup. He needed someone with more authority, someone who could handle this. This absurd situation. "One moment, please," he said, his voice now strained. He turned and walked away, his back ramrod straight. He didn't look back at her. He could feel her eyes on him, but he refused to turn. He walked quickly towards the back office, his mind racing. He found the store manager, Mr. Dubois. A man in his late 50s with silver hair at his temples and eyes that had seen every kind of customer imaginable. Mr. Dubois was reviewing the day's sales figures on a tablet. His expression, one of calm concentration. "Mr. Dubois," Julian said, trying to keep his voice low and professional. "There's a situation." At the Cascade case, Mr. Dubois looked up, raising an eyebrow. He had known Julian for years and could read the younger man's moods like a book. "A situation? Is it a security issue?" "No, not exactly," Julian said, glancing over his shoulder towards the corner of the store. "It's a young woman. She's asking to see the celestial cascade." Mr. Dubois didn't immediately react. He simply waited, knowing there was more to the story. "Not our usual clientele," Julian continued, struggling to find the right words. "Very young. Dressed very casually. Jeans. A tote bag. I tried the standard protocol, the appointment line, but she insisted. She said she's a qualified client," said the last part with a hint of disbelief. Mr. Dubois put down his tablet and stood up. He smoothed the front of his jacket. "And what is your assessment, Julian?" he asked, his voice calm and measured. "My assessment is that she's wasting our time," Julian said, a little too quickly. "But she's very persistent. I thought it best to have you handle it." Mr. Dubois nodded slowly. He didn't reprimand Julian for his judgment, but he didn't fully agree with it either. He had been in this business for too long to make assumptions based on appearance alone. He had seen scruffy-looking tech billionaires and old-money aristocrats who dressed like farmers, but he also knew that 9 times out of 10, Julian's assessments were correct. It was a delicate balance. "All right," he said. "I'll speak with her." As they walked out of the office and back onto the sales floor, Mr. Dubois observed the young woman from a distance. She was still standing there, exactly as Julian had left her. She hadn't moved. She wasn't fidgeting with her phone or looking around impatiently. She was just waiting, her posture relaxed, but her attention still fixed on the necklace. There was a stillness about her that was intriguing. It wasn't the stillness of boredom. It was the stillness of patience. Mr. Dubois approached her alone, gesturing for Julian to hang back. He came to a stop beside her, offering a small, more genuine smile than the one Julian had worn. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice warm and avuncular. "I am Mr. Dubois, the manager here. I understand you're interested in the celestial cascade." Anya turned to him, and her polite smile returned. "Yes, that's right. It's a pleasure to meet you. Your associate was going to show it to me." Mr. Dubois's eyes were kind, but they were also sharp. They took in every detail of her, just as Julian's had, but with a different kind of curiosity. He wasn't just looking for labels. He was looking for a story. "It is a magnificent piece, isn't it?" he said, his gaze shifting to the necklace. "One of a kind. We are very selective about who we show it to. For security and insurance reasons, you understand. Are you aware of the significance of this piece?" "I am," Anya said simply. "I'm aware of its design, its history, and its value." Mr. Dubois was slightly taken aback by her directness. Most people would have hemmed and hawed at this point. "And how is it that you are so familiar with it?" he asked, his tone still gentle, but now with a sharper edge of inquiry. "I've been following it for a while," she said. "I read an article about it in a gemology journal a few years ago. I've been waiting for the right time to come and see it in person." "A gemology journal?" The words hung in the air between them. Julian, watching from a distance, would have scoffed. But Mr. Dubois paused. It was not the answer he had expected. It was specific, credible, and it didn't sound like something a casual browser would say. He looked at her again, really looked at her. He saw the simple clothes, but he also saw the intelligence in her eyes, the quiet confidence in her stance. He had a gut feeling, a whisper of intuition that he had learned to trust over his long career. This was not a game. This was not a joke. This was something else entirely. He made a decision. It was a risk, but it was a calculated one. "Very well," he said, his voice now all business. "If you'll just excuse me for one moment, I will retrieve the key." He turned and walked towards the small, secure key vault behind the main counter. Julian intercepted him, his face a mask of disbelief. "Sir, you can't be serious. You're actually going to show it to her?" Mr. Dubois stopped and looked at his young associate, his expression stern. "Julian, in this business, we have two choices. We can judge people, or we can serve them. Our job is to serve. Now, she is asked to see a piece. I am going to show it to her. Please watch the floor while I'm occupied." He didn't wait for a reply. He went to the vault, his movements deliberate. He took a small, ornate silver key from a locked box. The sound of the vault door closing was a soft, final thud. He walked back towards the corner of the store, the key held carefully between his thumb and forefinger. The other sales associates had stopped what they were doing and were now watching, their curiosity piqued. The air in the store felt different, charged with a new and unexpected tension. Mr. Dubois reached the display case. Anya stood patiently, her eyes now on him. He knelt down, his aging joints protesting slightly. He inserted the small silver key into the almost invisible keyhole on the side of the glass case. There was a soft click as the lock disengaged. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden silence of the room. Slowly, carefully, he began to slide the heavy glass door to the side. The scent of polished wood and velvet seemed to intensify. The celestial cascade, freed from behind its glass barrier, seemed to glow with an even brighter, more intense fire. It was no longer just a display. It was a real, tangible object of immense value and beauty about to be touched, and the entire room held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The silence in the corner of Maison de l'Etoile was a living thing. It was heavy and thick, pressing in on the small group gathered around the open display case. The soft classical music still played from the hidden speakers, and the city hummed on outside, but in here, there was only the sound of breathing and the frantic, unspoken thoughts of the staff. Mr. Dubois, his movements slow and deliberate, reached into the case with hands that were surprisingly steady for a man of his age. He didn't grab the necklace. He lifted it, using both hands to support the weight, his fingers touching only the platinum settings, never the stones themselves. It was a ritual, a display of reverence for the object he was handling. He placed the celestial cascade onto a black, velvet-lined tray that he had retrieved from a hidden drawer beneath the counter. The necklace seemed to come alive on the dark fabric, the yellow and white diamonds erupting in a silent, brilliant explosion of light. Anya watched his every move, her expression unreadable. She didn't lean forward with wide, greedy eyes. She didn't gasp or murmur words of admiration. She simply observed, her posture relaxed, her hands resting calmly in the pockets of her denim jacket. To an outsider, she might have looked bored, but Mr. Dubois, who was now watching her more closely than he was watching the necklace, saw something else. He saw a deep, unwavering focus. She wasn't looking at the sparkle. She was looking at the structure, the artistry, the engineering of the piece. Julian, standing a few feet away, felt a knot of confusion tightening in his stomach. This was not how it was supposed to go. This girl should have been awestruck, intimidated, fumbling. She should have validated his initial assessment. Instead, her calm demeanor was unnerving, making him question his own judgment. He felt a trickle of sweat run down his back, and his suit suddenly felt too tight. He glanced at the other sales associates, Celine and a young man named Thomas. They had both stopped pretending to work and were staring openly, their faces a mixture of curiosity and disbelief.
"Oh!"
"It is quite something, isn't it?" Mr. Dubois said, his voice soft. He was trying to draw her out, to get some kind of reaction he could understand. Anya finally looked up from the tray and met his gaze. "It's a remarkable piece of craftsmanship," she said. Her voice was still quiet, but it was clear and confident. "The tension setting on the smaller stones is particularly impressive. It maximizes the light refraction without compromising security." She used the term tension setting as casually as someone might say the color's nice. Julian's mind went blank. He knew what a tension setting was, of course, but he had never heard a customer, especially one who looked like her, describe it with such precision. He felt a strange, dizzying sensation, as if the floor had just tilted slightly beneath his feet. Mr. Dubois, however, nodded slowly, a flicker of genuine respect in his eyes. "You have a good eye," he said. The designer was a true master of his craft. He paused, then decided to test her further. "Would you like to hold it?" It was a question he rarely asked. Most customers were too afraid, too conscious of the necklace's value. But he had a feeling about this young woman. "I would thank you," Anya said. As if he had just offered her a cup of tea, she pulled her hands from her pockets and extended them. Mr. Dubois carefully lifted the necklace from the tray and placed it in her palms. The weight of it made her arms dip slightly for a moment. It was heavier than it looked, a dense serpent of platinum and diamonds. Julian watched, holding his breath, expecting her to drop it, to fumble, to show some sign of being overwhelmed. But Anya didn't flinch. She held the necklace with the same steady confidence as Mr. Dubois had. She didn't let the diamonds dangle and sway. She supported it with both hands, her fingers tracing the delicate platinum chain. She brought it closer to her face, her eyes narrowed in concentration. She wasn't admiring her reflection in the stones. She was examining the tiny engravings on the back of the setting, the microscopic prongs that held each diamond in place. After a long moment, she looked up at Mr. Dubois. "Do you have a loupe?" She asked. A loupe. The word struck Julian like a physical blow. It was a small, high-powered magnifying glass used by jewelers, gemologists, and serious collectors. It was a tool of the trade, not a casual accessory. No one, in all his years at the store, had ever asked for a loupe. Mr. Dubois didn't hesitate. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a small silver loupe. He handed it to her. Of course, Anya took it and expertly folded it into her eye, her other hand still supporting the necklace. She leaned in, her face just inches from the cascade of diamonds. For what felt like an eternity, she was silent, her eye moving from stone to stone. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning. The other staff members had now crept closer, forming a small, silent semicircle around the scene. They were no longer just curious. They were witnessing something extraordinary. "The central stone," Anya said, her voice slightly muffled by the loupe. "The GA certificate lists it as a fancy vivid yellow, SI1 clarity. But the inclusion is located near the girdle on the pavilion side. It's not face-up visible. In my opinion, it performs more like a VS2. She lowered the loupe and looked at Mr. Dubois. "It's a beautiful stone. The color is exceptional, no green or brown undertones." Mr. Dubois simply stared at her. He was speechless. She wasn't just knowledgeable, she was an expert. She was grading a multi-million-dollar diamond with the authority of a seasoned gemologist. He felt a shiver of excitement run down his spine. He had been in this business for 40 years, and this was a first dot. Julian felt the blood drain from his face. The knot in his stomach had turned into a cold, hard stone of dread. Every word she spoke was another nail in the coffin of his arrogance. He remembered his dismissive glance, his condescending smile, his internal monologue about her being a waste of time. The memory made him feel sick. He saw Celine and Thomas exchange a wide-eyed look, and he knew they were all thinking the same thing. They had completely, utterly misjudged her. Mr. Dubois finally found his voice. "Your assessment is remarkably accurate," he said, his voice filled with a new kind of deference. "The inclusion is indeed well hidden. Most people never notice it." Anya nodded, as if this was just a confirmation of what she already knew. She continued her examination, moving down the necklace, checking the smaller diamonds. She asked about the source of the platinum, the specific alloys used. She asked about the history of the piece. who the designer had trained under. Mr. Dubois found himself answering her questions not as a salesman to a customer, but as an expert to a peer. He was enjoying himself. This was more interesting than any sale he had made in years. The atmosphere in the store had completely transformed. The initial tension had been replaced by a sense of awe and discovery. The staff were no longer just watching a potential customer. They were watching a master at work. Julian felt like an outsider in his own world. He had built his career on his ability to quickly size people up, and he had failed in the most spectacular way possible. He felt a deep, burning shame. He wanted to disappear, to melt into the plush carpet and be forgotten. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Anya finished her inspection. She carefully placed the loupe on the counter, and then, just as carefully, laid the celestial cascade back onto the velvet tray. She straightened up, her expression calm and satisfied. She looked at Mr. Dubois, her eyes clear and direct. "It's a beautiful piece," she said again. "It meets my expectations." There was a pause. Mr. Dubois waited, expecting a thank you or a statement about needing to think it over. This was the point where most customers, even the very wealthy ones, would hesitate. But Anya didn't hesitate. She reached into her large, faded canvas tote bag. Julian braced himself, expecting her to pull out a worn-out wallet, or worse, just her phone to take a picture. But she didn't. She pulled out a simple, unassuming leather wallet, dark brown and scuffed with use. She opened it and extracted a single plain black card. It wasn't a flashy American Express Platinum or a exclusive Centurion card. It was a simple debit card, the kind anyone could get from a bank. She held it out to Mr. Dubois. "I'd like to purchase it," she said, her voice as calm and steady as it had been when she walked in. "And the matching earrings, if you still have them?" The world seemed to stop for a moment, the air in the corner of the store becoming thick and heavy. The black debit card rested between Anya's fingers, a plain, unassuming piece of plastic that suddenly seemed more powerful than any stack of cash. Mr. Dubois looked at the card, then at Anya's calm face, and then back at the card. He had seen every kind of payment method imaginable, briefcases full of cash, cards made of solid gold, corporate checks with more zeros than a phone number. But he had never in his 40 years in the business seen someone attempt to buy a multi-million-dollar necklace with a simple debit card. For a split second, a flicker of doubt crossed his mind. Was this an incredibly elaborate prank? Was there a hidden camera somewhere? He scanned her face again, searching for any sign of a smirk, any hint of deception. He found nothing. There was only a quiet, patient confidence, as if she were buying a loaf of bread and not one of the rarest jewels in the country. His gut feeling, the one that had told him to take her seriously, screamed at him to trust her. Julian, however, was not operating on gut feeling. He was operating on pure, unadulterated shock. A strangled, almost inaudible sound escaped his lips. It was a mix of a gasp and a choke. He felt a hot flush of shame creep up his neck, burning his ears. His carefully constructed world of snap judgments and customer profiling had just been detonated, and the blast had left him exposed and foolish. He watched as Mr. Dubois, with a hand that was not quite steady, reached for the card. "Of course," Mr. Dubois said, his voice a little hoarse. He cleared his throat. "If you'll just come with me to the counter, we can process this for you." His tone was now one of pure, unadulterated deference. The gentle, avuncular quality was gone, replaced by the respect one might give a head of state, as they walked to the main counter. The other staff members scrambled to look busy. Celine suddenly found a microscopic smudge on a glass case that needed immediate polishing. Thomas picked up a velvet cloth and began furiously, but pointlessly, wiping down a display of silver cufflinks. They were all trying to erase the memory of their own dismissive glances, their own internal calculations that had so spectacularly missed the mark. They all felt Julian's shame, but for him, it was 1,000 times worse. He was the head associate. He was the one who had been so arrogantly confident in his dismissal of her. He was supposed to be the best, and he had just been proven to be the most blind. He stood frozen by the now empty display case, his feet feeling as if they were cemented to the floor. At the counter, Mr. Dubois took the card. "The matching earrings," he said, his voice regaining some of its composure. "They are kept in our main vault. It will take me just a moment to retrieve them." "Thank you," Anya said simply. "I can wait." Mr. Dubois disappeared into the back office, and Anya was left standing at the counter alone for a moment. She didn't look around. She didn't pull out her phone. She just stood there, her hands resting on the counter, her posture relaxed and patient. She was an island of calm in a sea of silent panic. Inside the office, Mr. Dubois took a deep breath. He went to the vault, a massive steel door with a complex combination lock. His hands, usually so sure, felt clumsy as he dialed the numbers. He retrieved the earrings, which were nestled in their own velvet box. They were as stunning as the necklace, a delicate cluster of canary and white diamonds that would frame a face with starlight. He placed the box on his desk and then picked up the phone. He had to call the bank for an authorization. For a purchase this large, a simple swipe would never do. It required a verbal confirmation, a series of security questions, and a manager's override code. He dialed the number from the list on his desk. "This is Henry Dubois from Maison de la Toile," he said when the call was answered. "I need a pre-authorization for a debit transaction." He gave him the card number, his voice low and professional. He waited, listening to the hold music, his heart thumping a little faster than usual. Out on the sales floor, Julian could hear the faint, tinny sound of the music through the office door. Each note felt like a hammer blow against his pride. He saw Celine and Thomas steal glances at Anya, their faces filled with a mixture of awe and terror. They were all waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the call to end with a polite decline. After what felt like an eternity, Mr. Dubois's voice became audible again. "Yes, that's correct. The amount is... Yes, I'll spell it for you." He rattled off the figure, a number so large it seemed to suck the air out of the room, even through the closed door. He answered a series of questions. Date of birth. Mother's maiden name. First pet's name, was confirming Anya's identity, and with each answer he received, the reality of the situation became more and more concrete. Finally, he hung up the phone. He stood there for a moment, the silence in the office absolute. He looked at the earrings in their box, then at the debit card on his desk. He let out a long, slow breath he didn't realize he had been holding. Then he picked up the card and the earrings and walked back out onto the sales floor. His face was unreadable as he approached the counter. He handed the card back to Anya. "Everything appears to be in order," he said, his voice quiet but firm. He then took the card processing machine and slid the card through its slot. The sound of the strip being read was unnaturally loud in the silent store. Everyone watched the small screen. The machine whirred and clicked, processing the request from a satellite miles away. Then, a sound cut through the tension. It was the high-pitched whir of the internal printer. A thin strip of white paper began to emerge from the side of the machine, covered in black ink. It was the receipt. The confirmation, the proof. The sound seemed to break a spell. Celine let out a small, audible gasp. Thomas put a hand over his mouth, and Julian felt his knees go weak. He had to put a hand on the edge of a nearby display case to steady himself. It was real. It was really real. This young woman, this girl he had dismissed as a waste of time, had just purchased one of the most expensive items in the store with a card from her wallet. Mr. Dubois tore the receipt from the machine. He placed it on the counter along with a fine-tipped pen. "If you could just sign here, please," he said, his voice filled with a reverence that was no longer an act. Anya picked up the pen and signed her name with a quick, fluid scrawl. It was illegible, but confident. As she put the pen down, Julian finally found the strength to move. He took a shaky step forward, his face pale and his eyes filled with a desperate, pleading shame. I am so sorry," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "My behavior earlier, it was unforgivable." Anya looked up at him. Her eyes were not cold or angry. They were just clear. She looked at him for a long moment, and Julian felt as if she were looking directly into his soul. seeing every arrogant, judgmental thought he had ever had. He braced himself for her to say something cutting, something he deserved. Instead, she just gave him a small, gentle shrug. "It's all right," she said softly. "You were just doing your job." The kindness in her voice was infinitely more cutting than any anger could have been. It wasn't a dismissal. It was an absolution he didn't feel he deserved. It showed him that his behavior had been so insignificant to her that she hadn't even been offended by it. She had just moved past it. Mr. Dubois, who had overheard the exchange, decided to take control. He began the process of packing the items. He took a large, elegant box from behind the counter, lined with the same plush white velvet as the display cases. He first placed the earrings in their smaller box inside. Then he carefully lifted the celestial cascade from its tray and laid it on the velvet. The diamonds seemed to sigh as they settled into their new temporary home. He closed the lid with a soft final click. He then placed this large box into a sleek, silver-colored carrier bag with the store's discreet logo on the side. He handed the bag to Anya. "Thank you for your purchase," he said, his voice thick with genuine emotion. "It has been an honor." Anya took the bag. For a moment, she held the expensive, elegant carrier in her hand. Then she did something that no one expected. She opened her worn canvas tote bag, the one with the faded design, and carefully placed the entire silver carrier inside. The contrast was jarring, a perfect symbol of the entire afternoon. The priceless treasure now nestled inside a bag that looked like it had carried library books and groceries. She zipped up her tote, slung it over her shoulder, and gave Mr. Dubois one last, charming smile. "Thank you for your help," she said. Then she turned and began to walk towards the door, leaving the staff of Maison de la Toile standing in a state of silent, utter shock. Their world forever changed by a quiet young woman and her simple debit card. The heavy glass door closed with a soft, final click, the sound echoing in the profound silence that had fallen over the store. Anya was gone. She had walked out the same way she had walked in, with a quiet, unassuming grace, as if she had just finished a casual bit of shopping and completed a transaction that would fund the store's operations for the better part of a year. The silver carrier bag with the priceless treasure was now hidden inside her faded canvas tote. It's a secret she carried with her out into the bustling city. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The world she had just briefly stepped into was of no more consequence to her than the world she had left behind. For her, it was simply a task completed. For the staff of Maison de la Toile, however, the world had just been turned upside down. The silence she left in her wake was a physical presence, a heavy blanket that smothered the usual hushed elegance of the store. The soft classical music still played, but it sounded distant and irrelevant. The diamonds in their glass cases continued to sparkle under the spotlights. But now their light seemed sharp and accusing, reflecting the shocked faces of the people staring at them. No one moved. No one spoke. They were like statues frozen in the moment of a cataclysmic event, their minds struggling to process the impossible reality that had just unfolded. Julian was the first to break, though not with sound or movement. It was an internal collapse. The hand he had placed on the display case to steady himself now felt as if it were welded to the cool glass. He stared at the empty velvet pad where the celestial cascade had lain. The impression of the necklace still visible in the plush fabric. The scene replayed in his mind in a relentless, torturous loop. He saw his own dismissive glance, the condescending curve of his smile. The practiced tone he had used to tell her the piece was for qualified clients. He saw her calm, patient face. He heard her use words like tension setting and pavilion side. He saw the plain black debit card, a symbol of a reality so far beyond his comprehension it made his head spin. A cold, hard knot of shame formed in his gut, so dense and painful it felt like a physical illness. He had built his entire career, his entire sense of self-worth, on his ability to judge people, to separate the worthy from the unworthy. And in one afternoon he had been proven not just wrong, but profoundly, embarrassingly, foolishly blind. He wasn't just a bad salesman. He was a bad person. That was the thought that echoed in the sudden, terrifying emptiness of his mind. Mr. Dubois was the first to move. He let out a long, slow breath, the sound of a man who had just witnessed a force of nature. He looked around at his frozen team, at their pale faces and wide, unblinking eyes. He saw Julian leaning against the counter as if he might collapse at any moment. He saw Celine and Thomas standing by their respective displays, looking lost and small. He knew this was more than just a surprising sale. It was a lesson delivered with the force of a tidal wave, and it was his job to help them understand it. He walked over to the main counter and began to methodically straighten the things that were already straight. He aligned the receipt machine perfectly with the edge of the counter. He wiped a spotless surface with a velvet cloth. These small, mundane actions were a way to break the spell, to bring the world back from the brink of chaos. "Well," he said, his voice quiet but firm, cutting through the silence, "that is not something that happens every day." His words seemed to unlock the staff's frozen state. Celine let out a shaky breath she didn't know she was holding. Thomas ran a hand through his hair, his eyes still fixed on the door. But Julian remained frozen, his gaze lost in the empty display case. Mr. Dubois walked over to him, stepped soft on the thick carpet. He didn't say anything at first, just stood beside the younger man looking at the same empty space. "Julian," he said gently. Julian flinched at the sound of his name. He slowly turned his head, his eyes filled with a raw, desperate shame that Mr. Dubois had never seen before. "I'm sorry, sir," he whispered, his voice cracking. I failed. I failed you, and I failed this store." Mr. Dubois shook his head slowly. "No, Julian. You didn't fail the store. The store is fine. Better than fine, actually." He paused, choosing his words with care. "You failed to see a person, and in doing that, you failed yourself." The words were kind, but they struck Julian with the force of a blow. He looked down at his expensive suit, at his perfectly manicured hands. They felt like a costume now, a ridiculous uniform for a role he had just proven he couldn't play. "How?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "How could I have been so wrong?" "Because you were looking with your eyes and not with your mind," Mr. Dubois said, his tone not accusatory but explanatory. "You saw the jeans in the tote bag, and you stopped looking. You saw a category, a type of person who doesn't belong here. You forgot that people are not categories. They are stories. And you never bothered to even ask for the first page of hers." He placed a hand on Julian's shoulder. "I have been in this business for 40 years, and I have made that same mistake. Not on such a grand scale, perhaps, but I have made it. The most important lesson this job can teach you is that you never ever know who is walking through that door. The person who looks like they have nothing to lose is often the one who can afford to lose everything. And the person who looks like they own the world is often drowning in debt." Just then, Thomas, who had wandered over to the large front window, let out a soft gasp. "Sir, you should come see this." Mr. Dubois and Julian walked over to join him, Celine following close behind. They looked out through the spotless glass onto the busy street. There, parked at the curb directly in front of the store, was a car. It wasn't a flashy sports car or a brightly colored SUV. It was a large, black sedan, the kind of vehicle that was designed to be unnoticed, its presence a quiet statement of immense power. It was a Bentley, or perhaps a Rolls-Royce. Its lines so perfect and its finish so deep it seemed to absorb the light around it. It was the kind of car that whispered money instead of shouting it. As they watched, a chauffeur, dressed in a crisp black uniform, emerged from the driver's side and walked around to open the rear passenger door. And then Anya stepped out from behind a pillar where she had been waiting. She had pulled her phone from her tote and was making a call, her expression as calm and untroubled as it had been in the store. She finished her call, slipped the phone back into her bag, and got into the car. The chauffeur closed the door behind her, walked back to the driver's seat, and with the whisper of a powerful engine, the expensive, discreet car merged into traffic and disappeared around the corner. The four of them stood at the window, staring at the empty space where the car had been. It was the final, undeniable piece of evidence. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was real. Anya wasn't just rich. She was a level of wealthy that operated on a different plane of existence. A world where multi-million-dollar necklaces, purchased with a simple card and stored in a canvas tote, Celine leaned against the window, her forehead pressed against the cool glass. "Oh my God," she breathed. Thomas just shook his head, look of utter disbelief on his face. But for Julian, the sight of the car didn't bring the shock of a new revelation. It brought the crushing weight of confirmation. He had not just misjudged a customer. He had insulted a woman who lived in a world he couldn't even imagine. Her kindness, her simple "it's all right," suddenly felt less like an absolution and more like a reflection of her character. She was so far above his petty judgment that it wasn't even worth her time to be angry. And that was the most humbling thought of all. The rest of the afternoon passed in a daze. The store was quiet. The few customers who came in, seeming like actors in a play the staff had lost interest in. Julian moved through his duties like an automaton, his mind a million miles away. He kept replaying the events, but now, with the image of the black sedan burned into his memory, the replay was even more painful. At the end of the day, as the staff were getting ready to leave, Mr. Dubois called Julian into his office. Julian expected a reprimand, perhaps even a dismissal. He stood before the manager's desk, his head bowed, ready to accept his fate. Mr. Dubois didn't look up from the paperwork on his desk at first. He just scribbled a note, signed it with a flourish, and placed it in an envelope. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and looked at Julian. "I'm not going to fire you, Julian," he said, as if reading his mind. "What happened today was painful, I know. But pain is a powerful teacher. I could fire you, but then you would just go to another store and make the same mistake. Here, you have a chance to learn." He stood up and walked around the desk, standing in front of the younger man. "I want you to think about something. The most valuable thing in this store is not in any of those glass cases. It's not the celestial cascade or any of the other diamonds. The most valuable thing is your ability to see the person standing in front of you. Today, you lost sight of that. But you can find it again. I suggest you start looking for it tomorrow." The next morning, Julian arrived at the store an hour before it opened. The place was empty and quiet, just as it had been on the day Anya walked in. But for Julian, it felt completely different. He walked over to the display case in the far corner, the one that had held the celestial cascade, took out a soft cloth and a bottle of cleaner, and he began to polish the glass. He worked slowly, methodically, his movements focused and deliberate. He wasn't just cleaning a smudge. He was wiping away a memory, a mistake. As he worked, the heavy glass door swung open. A young man, probably no older than Anya, walked in. He was wearing a hoodie, worn-out sneakers, and had a backpack slung over his shoulder. He looked around the store with a curious, slightly intimidated expression. In the past, Julian would have given him a fleeting, dismissive glance. He would have waited for one of the other associates to deal with him, or he would have approached him with the same polite but firm script he had used on Anya. But today was different. Julian put down his cloth, straightened his tie, and walked towards the young man. He didn't walk with the practiced confidence of a shark. He walked with the quiet humility of a person who had learned a difficult lesson. He stopped a few feet from the young man and offered him a small, genuine smile. It was a smile that reached his eyes. "Good morning," Julian said, his voice warm and welcoming. "Welcome to Maison de l'Oil. We're not quite open yet, but please feel free to look around. Take your time. Let me know if I can help you with anything at all."